Hello, welcome back to another unit, and now we're starting with Unit 5. Oh my God, can you believe we've already made it to Unit 5 and it's only December? Let's go ahead and get started with the first human body system, the circulatory system. And we're going to get started with Unit 5, Day 1, which is the circulatory system. We're going to be going through all the human body systems in this unit, so get ready. All right, so we're taking a look here at Unit 5, Day 1, and we start with the circulatory system. So hopefully when you see circulatory system, you're already thinking that you know what that is. But just in case you don't, let's go ahead and there we go. All right, so the circulatory system is, of course, what circulates, or the system that transports, right? Circulate, transports blood throughout your body. Right, so we've already talked a lot about this during Unit 4 when we were talking about transport and how starch needs to be broken down before it can be diffused throughout the body, before it can cross the cell membrane. Once we observe, or in our bodies actually have molecules pass through the cell membrane, it's then when they can be included in our blood and be passed all throughout the circulatory system. And that's the main function of the circulatory system, is to transport our blood, which is filled with nutrients and oxygen throughout our bodies. So if our circulatory system wasn't pumping blood throughout our bodies, our cells wouldn't be able to receive the nutrients like glucose and the gases like oxygen that they need in order to perform cellular respiration. Additionally, and you might have already been thinking this, not only does our circulatory system transport things that we need to our cells, it also takes away things that we don't need from our cells, like waste, including carbon dioxide. So all of that is a high-level summary about how the circulatory system works. Let's go ahead and get into the details about how the different part works. And today we're starting with, how does the circulatory system, and remember that's our heart that pumps our blood throughout our body, help us maintain homeostasis, right? So that stable internal environment. And the way that the circulatory system does that is by transporting needed gases and nutrients to our cells and also carrying them away from our cells. And in that way, the circulatory system helps every cell in our body and the whole organism, us, maintain homeostasis. Pretty cool. Thanks, circulatory system. Right? And this function of gas exchange that involves our respiratory system and the transportation of nutrients that involves our digestive system are both intimately related with the circulatory system. And that should be making you think about things that we've already learned, right? It should be making you think about what that glucose and oxygen are doing at a cellular level, right? They're heading to the cells to complete cell respiration and give all of our bodies the energy, the ATP that they need to carry out essential life functions to keep us alive. Again, thanks, circulatory system. So now, the human body can be understood as different levels of organization. In the spaces below, fill in the levels of organization from the smallest to largest. All right, here we go. So we're going to start all the way down at the smallest level where cell respiration is actually happening, right? So we have the organelle. And in this case, I hope you're already thinking the organelle we're thinking of is the mitochondria, right? And so the mitochondria is undergoing cellular respiration by using oxygen and glucose that we inhaled and ate to create energy for our cells, right? And once the mitochondria creates that ATP, it is transported out of the mitochondria into the cell itself to be used for the cell to carry out all of its essential life functions, like synthesizing proteins, transport, all that controlling of replication of DNA, controlling replication of the cell itself. All of these functions occur with the help of ATP. Then, beyond the cell, okay, so the ATP that's in the cell is being used to also help that cell carry out the function that it has. For example, a cell in your eye is theoretically part of helping you see. A cell in your mouth is theoretically part of helping you eat, right? So not only does the cell need to keep itself alive, it also needs to perform another function, but it performs that function in a group with other similar type cells in our tissues. So tissues, an easy way to think about tissues is like your skin, right? Your skin is a very large organ, like a little section of your skin, right? This is tissue. And what that means is that's a group of like cells performing the same function. So for example, we have tissues in our heart, we have tissues in our brain like gray matter, we have tissues in our mouths, the cells in our mouths, a collection. My lip, that's tissue. So tissue is just a collection of like cells performing function together. However, they're not as organized as the next level of organization, where several tissues might gather together. For example, in the brain, white matter and gray matter gather together to form the organ of our brain. And today, the organ that you might be thinking of is, of course, the heart, right? Because we're talking about the circulatory system. And the heart is the primary organ in the circulatory system, but even though she's the star of the show, it's really the backup that is most important to the actual function of the circulatory system, right? Our heart pumps our blood, but without all of our blood vessels down to the teeny tiny capillaries, we wouldn't be able to actually perform the transport and circulate function of the circulatory system. But the energy and the force to pump the blood all throughout our bodies is from our heart. Thanks, heart. And then our heart is part of the circulatory system. So that's the organ system. So like the nervous system, the digestive system that we've already talked about, the circulatory system that we're talking about right now, the respiratory system that we're going to talk about next, right? All of those are organ systems. So you can think about it like a cell is a group of organelles working together to perform the basic life functions of that cell and help it carry out a broader goal as part of a group of cells in tissue. Those tissues are part of a broader group of more organized tissues that make up an organ that work together to carry out the life functions to maintain the organ and then also to broadly maintain the organism. Those organs or that organ works together with a system of other organs that work together to help maintain themselves and also maintain the entire organism. which brings us to the final and most organized or most sophisticated or most complex level, and that's the whole organism, right? So that's you. You are the organism. An onion is an organism. Anything that is living is an organism. We've got it: organelle, cell, tissue, organ, organ system, organism. That should be review from Unit 2. Which process ensures that our cells have all the oxygen and nutrients that they need? Circulation of blood. And that happens by our heart pumping the blood throughout all of our blood vessels. And remember that oxygen gets into our blood at the lungs. We're going to talk a lot more about that briefly in the circulatory system unit, but then more in the respiratory system. But these two systems work really, really, really like well, or rather intimately, like very closely together, the respiratory system and the circulatory system. So you should always be thinking about the two together, especially in living environment. And you can also think about what you might know already about anatomy, right? Where is your heart? It's right between your lungs. And that should give you a clue as to how they work together, right? And that's where the oxygen comes from. And again, the nutrients come from the food that we eat. And those nutrients are absorbed at the site of the small intestine, where they're actually able to diffuse into the bloodstream and be circulated throughout our bodies to provide, again, all of our cells with the nutrients that they need. So, the circulatory system. Let's talk about her. So here she is. We've got the heart here in the center, right? So the heart is the pump. We've got arteries. That are carrying the blood away from the heart, which I believe are depicted in red in this image. We've got veins that I believe are depicted in blue in this image. And the colors are used to signify the oxygen versus the carbon dioxide content. But it's not extremely important that you be able to recognize in an image the difference between arteries and veins, but we are going to talk about how the blood vessels themselves look and how that can give you a clue as to which one is which. And that will come up on your exit ticket. So if when you're doing your exit ticket, you're confused, come back to this part of the video. All right, so we've got the arteries, we've got the heart, we've got the veins, and then shout out to Tenzin in 7th period, we've got the capillaries. And the capillaries are, in my opinion, the real stars of the show. The capillaries are responsible for gas exchange at the cellular level in every part of our bodies. Without the capillaries, our individual cells would not be able to be supplied with blood and oxygen, because the capillaries are such tiny little blood vessels that they're able to get really, really close to each individual cell. And because they have little holes in them, which we'll take a look at, the capillaries are able to have diffusion occurring all the time, right? So the capillaries are the site of gas and nutrient exchange. Most important thing about the capillaries. So arteries, blood away from the heart. The heart is the pump. The veins carry blood back to the heart. The way I remember that is that process is called venous return. Venous obviously is veins, but that might not be helpful to you, but just it's how I remember. Arteries, A away makes perfect sense, but then I confirm the other side with, I know it's venous return, right? So the veins are what bring the blood back to the heart. And we're going to look at how these blood vessels are shaped, or rather, I'm going to draw them out for you, and that should also give you a clue. So, but first, let's get a definition of the circulatory system on our papers that we can agree upon. All right, I'm actually going to show this to you a little bit differently. So we're taking a look here at our circulatory system. And our circulatory system is a vast network of organs and vessels that is responsible for the flow of blood, nutrients, oxygen, and other gases and hormones to and from cells. So that's a mouthful, but the circulatory system brings nutrients, oxygen, and other gases and hormones. It transports everything that needs to be transported throughout our bodies, and including taking away wastes. Thanks, circulatory system. How does it do that? With the help of the heart. That is a muscular organ that pumps blood, right? Our heart is primarily a muscle, and that's its job. It pumps our blood. And that's where the term, if you've ever heard the term blood pressure, comes from. That's the pressure created by the force of our heart pumping, right? So as our heart pumps, it's pushing blood out at a high pressure. And we need high blood pressure, especially in our hearts. What you don't want, if you've ever heard the term high blood pressure, is hypertension, which is chronically too high blood pressure that can be damaging to your blood vessels. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I bring up the term blood pressure because our veins have a low blood pressure. And the reason for that being, our veins are carrying blood back to our hearts. So this blood isn't being pumped, it's rather returning via the process of venous return, right? So for example, in our legs, we have veins, our very long veins that have to carry the blood all the way back up from our feet to our hearts. So this can be a slow process. And as you might be imagining, gravity can get in the way. But our veins are not very muscular. So as a result, some people that have conditions like diabetes that affect their circulation may need to wear something called compression socks, which helps literally compress their veins to carry the blood more efficiently back up to the heart. But the blood vessel that can withstand this higher blood pressure are the arteries. And why can they withstand a higher blood pressure? Well, it's because your arteries come directly from your heart. They're carrying that oxygenated blood away from the heart. And then my favorite blood vessel, because they're so important, are the teeny tiny capillaries. And they're the smallest blood vessel, and they provide blood to the organs and muscles. And let's go ahead and draw out what these blood vessels look like. So we've got here the veins, and remember the veins carry deoxygenated or without oxygen. We're going to signify deoxygenated with blue. Carry deoxygenated blood back to heart. And that's really about how your vein looks, right? So it's a flat blood vessel. It sort of has like a thin opening. Oh dear. It has a sort of thin opening. It's not very muscular, and it's flat. Okay, so your veins can be not flat, but this is typically how they're depicted. And this is how your veins will look in the exit ticket. Hint, hint. Now, your arteries. Arteries are quite different, right? The way you can remember, arteries carry blood away from your heart. and they specifically carry oxygenated blood. And hopefully you can remember this because your lungs are right next to your heart. So your arteries pick up the oxygen right there at your lungs. And your arteries are able then to pump that blood. Oh, I'm realizing that the word blood isn't written here. So these are your blood vessels, and they carry deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood throughout our bodies. So if our veins don't have a lot of oxygen, they have higher CO2. High CO2, low O2. And our arteries have the opposite problem. So our arteries are low CO2, high O2. Okay, and this is good. This is how they function. Our capillaries are pretty neat because our capillaries, oh, hold on, let's draw an artery first. So an artery is going to look much larger. It has these thick muscular walls and still a pretty large opening. You notice this is like not flat. It almost looks like a big muscular donut. And that's sort of how your arteries look, right? Or how they're depicted anyway in a diagram. But the reason they're depicted this way is because our arteries are a muscular blood vessel. And they have these thick muscular walls so that they can withstand the high blood pressure coming from your heart. So they're thick. And this is so that they can pump blood and so that they can also handle the blood when it comes right out of your heart. Now, your capillaries are the site of gas exchange, meaning the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mix in the capillaries. Okay, so O2 and CO2 mix. And they're able to do this because this is where gas exchange is happening. This is where the O2 is being sent back into the rest of the bloodstream and the CO2 is being sent out of the body. So because they're the site of gas exchange, they're extremely important to diffusion. And they're sort of depicted a little bit like this. So they're small, thin, with porous holes for diffusion. The function of the capillaries is that they're small so they can get all up close inside your muscles and your organs and carry the blood and provide blood supply. That's the function of the capillaries. So the O2 and CO2 mix because that's gas exchange. All right, so let's go on to part B, circulatory system, facts and functions. The circulatory system is a vast network of organs and vessels that are responsible for the flow of blood, nutrients, oxygen, other gases, and hormones to and from cells. Without the circulatory system, the body would not be able to fight disease or maintain a stable internal environment, such as proper temperature and pH, known as homeostasis. So we know the organ in our circulatory system is our heart, and our body is able to perform all of these functions and maintain homeostasis because of the function of our circulatory system, transporting needed nutrients and oxygen and hormones to our cells and carrying away waste from cells. While many view the circulatory system as simply a highway for blood, it is also known as the cardiovascular system. It is made up of three interdependent systems that work together. The first is the heart, the cardiovascular system, which acts as the pump to move blood. Ooh, I'm recording. The second are the lungs, the respiratory system. So again, this is why I was saying the circulatory system and the respiratory system are like this, brothers. So the circulatory system works with the respiratory system. So the second are the lungs, the respiratory system, which provide oxygen to the blood, critical, and remove carbon dioxide from the blood. Finally, the third is the network of arteries, which carry the oxygenated blood to the body, and veins, which carry the deoxygenated blood filled with carbon dioxide away from the body. And I would call this the network of blood vessels. Right? And you may have heard that term vessel, right? And that just means something that carries something else. Our blood vessels carry our blood. So blood vessels include the veins, right? These are blood vessels. So that's veins, arteries, capillaries. So these are the two primary parts of the circulatory system, the heart and blood vessels. And then the third part that is also very important is your respiratory system. And looking at this diagram, right? That's because your lungs are literally right there on either side of your heart. In the average human, about 2,000 gallons of blood travel daily through about 60,000 miles of blood vessels each day. What? And remember, that's not 2,000 new gallons of blood. That's your blood circulating. That's why we use this term, right? Your blood is pumping over and over and over and over again throughout your body, but it's different every time because it's picking up new oxygen, it's taking away new carbon dioxide, it's picking up different hormones, it's picking up even things like antibodies when you're sick. Everything is transported through your blood. And I believe tomorrow we're going to watch a little video about that called the Bloodmobile. So that blood, it's pretty critical. Those 2,000 gallons of blood contain oxygen, carbon dioxide, you name it, it's probably in your blood. In the average human, about 2,000 gallons of blood travel through the 60,000 miles of blood vessels each day. An average adult has 5 to 6 quarts of blood, which is made up of plasma. These are the constituents of your blood. This is what your blood is made out of. Plasma, red blood cells, and white blood cells, and platelets. Typically, we draw the constituents of blood. We're going to touch upon them briefly, but it's not typically covered in the units. In the regions, excuse me, but those are the parts of your blood. So your blood is made up of plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So the plasma is the fluid. It's like the liquid that makes up your blood. It's thick. The red blood cells, those are probably what you're thinking of when you think of a blood cell. They look like little donuts. And they don't have a hole in the middle, but they have a little indentation. And that indentation is important to their ability to carry oxygen, carbon dioxide, and iron. Erythrocytes is the scientific term for our blood cells. And you may remember we observed them under a microscope in Unit 1. In addition to blood, the circulatory system moves lymph, which is a clear fluid that helps rid the body of unwanted material. So an example of something that would be in your lymph could be like those antibodies, not when they've been freshly created and they're on their way to fight the infection, but after your antibodies have fought the infection, they take whatever waste that they've produced by destroying those cells, and that waste is sent through your lymph, which is then eventually stored in your lymph nodes. Our lymphatic system is extremely interesting, but it's a little above our pay grade here in living environment. So you'll talk more about the lymphatic system if in the future you take anatomy and physiology, maybe when you're in college, or when you take AP biology here at Manhattan Center. So now let's put it all together. What is the role of the circulatory system and how does it work with the respiratory system? So the circulatory system pumps oxygenated blood picked up at the lungs via the arteries throughout the body the CO2 is collected by the veins and is carried back so the CO2 can be released. And my small caveat here is that all of the actual gas exchange is happening in the capillaries. So what is the role of the circulatory system and how does it work with the respiratory system? The circulatory system pumps oxygenated blood picked up at the lungs via the arteries throughout the body to carry O2 to our cells. Then after that, but also literally at the exact same time, at the lungs, this carbon dioxide is exchanged, this process called gas exchange, for O2 and exhaled. The carbon dioxide that we're exhaling was collected by the capillaries, actually, but then transported throughout the veins, carried back to the heart, where the CO2 can be released into our external environment. Without the circulatory system, how might our bodies struggle to maintain homeostasis? Well, take your pick, ladies and gentlemen. There's quite a few ways. Our cells would be unable without blood supply, because that gives oxygen and nutrients. You may be able to think of another reason and go ahead and feel free to write it there, right? So our cells would be unable to carry out cell respiration because they don't have the two things that they need. They wouldn't have oxygen or nutrients, which are both transported throughout the blood, and wastes specifically carbon dioxide, would build up in our cells and organs, and we would be unable to release it because that carbon dioxide is carried in the blood where it is exhaled at the lungs. And now, state whether the oxygen and carbon dioxide concentrations, respectively, would be high or low. So remember, the veins carry deoxygenated, so low oxygen, high CO2, blood back to the heart. So this is like the bus on the way home from the field trip, right? Exhausted, done, not high energy. But the arteries, on the other hand, they're the bus on the way to the field trip. High oxygen, low CO2 because they haven't picked up any waste from our cells yet. And instead they're like gung-ho on their way, carrying away from the heart. And that is enough about that. What I will draw your attention to is the exit slip for today is talking about 2 questions talking about the veins, arteries, and capillaries. And I want to draw your attention to these images of the veins, arteries, and capillaries to help you answer those questions on the exit ticket. Remember, the arteries are thick and muscular to pump blood, the capillaries are small and thin, and the veins are flat and they're not muscular. Today's aim was, how does the circulatory system maintain homeostasis? And remember that homeostasis is a stable internal environment maintained largely by, thanks circulatory system, pumping oxygen and nutrients throughout our bodies. All right, that's all I have for you today on the first day of the circulatory system. Sorry this was a long video, guys, but I hope you enjoyed. See you all tomorrow on Zoom. Bye, guys.